I'm going to be discussing the basics of constructed response questions. So, what are constructed response questions? In essence, they're the opposite of what we discussed last week, which was the selected response questions. In that situation, you got to choose from a variety of options that were provided for you. So the student didn't necessarily have to think critically about what they were reading and didn't necessarily even have to know what the answer was to have a chance, however minimal, of guessing the right answer. So rather than having a selection of choices, you actually put all of the onus for the student on constructing the answer themselves. So typical examples of this are essays and short answer questions, which you'll be familiar with, but things like oral presentations and demonstrations are also constructed response questions. Slightly different nature, but in essence exactly the same sort of concept. What advantage do constructed responses have over things like multiple choice questions? A number. So one, they have no cueing. Students often need to think deeply about the answers, so they're much easier to test higher level cognitive skills than selected response questions. They are easier to write, but they have a disadvantage, which is that they are very costly to mark. So multiple choice questions, matching questions, all of those selected response type questions can be marked automatically. And this means, of course, that the cost for setting these sorts of exams can be really quite minimal once the questions have been written. Short answer questions, oral presentations, those sorts of constructed response questions are very easy to write. And it's something that is a real benefit for testing in-depth knowledge and understanding. However, when it comes to marking it, they take a long time to mark and therefore have a cost associated with them. And even if you're marking the same essay yourself over a period of time, you will find that you can't actually be consistent with other markers or even yourself. So there's a lower reliability in that space. Selected response questions are relatively short and you can cover a lot of content using 20 or 40 multiple choice or true-false questions. With an essay question or a short answer, you can't ask that many because they take time to write. And so from a teacher's perspective, you have to be very particular about what it is you're testing with your essays and your short answer questions because you can't cover all of the content that you might have been teaching. How do we mark essays? Typically we use form of criteria basis. Rubrics help guide the markers in the way that they allocate marks, and therefore it's really, really important that you have a rubric that can help with that sort of level of consistency. It will improve the intermarker reliability, and that means that there is greater reliability of the essay or the short answer question, particularly essays. So you often need to have other markers check the work, so there's a duplication of effort there, but we need that to moderate the marks that someone gives in terms of an essay. So for example, if we're writing essays in this particular course, then around the boundaries, around the distinction and high distinction marks, around the pass and the credit areas, we will get another moderator to come in and check the marking to make sure that there is some consistency there and that the students aren't subjected to biases from one particular marker. So how can we design constructed response items? Essentially, the process is exactly the same as with selected response questions. First off, define the purpose. Why are you asking this question? And what will the outcomes of the question tell us about the student? If you can't answer those questions, then you shouldn't be setting that particular item. What level of Bloom's taxonomy are you assessing? This is actually really important for constructed response questions because if you're testing low levels of Bloom's taxonomy, you should probably be using a multiple choice question instead. So there are decisions that you have to make, and often deciding which level of Bloom's taxonomy you're assessing might be the one. So if it is simply just a case of wanting to know whether students know how many planets there are in the solar system, you don't need to get them to write a short answer question for that. What you can do is use a multiple choice question or a matched response or something like that, which can be automatically scored and provide feedback to the students automatically. So you need to define the area of assessment. What topics need to be assessed? Prioritize them. How are they related to the learning objectives or the learning outcomes? if you can't relate your assessment item to the learning outcomes, once again, you need to rethink what you're doing. And then you need to think about how many assessments do I need in this area? Is 1 enough? Maybe 0 is enough. Maybe you need 4 or 5 to actually test the breadth. All of these things will govern the nature of the response item that you're actually setting, and will make your decision about whether you use selected response or constructed response much clearer. So essentially, designing constructed response items exactly the same as any other item that you might choose to create. Rubrics. So we will discuss rubrics in class, but should the students be aware of the rubric? Should they see it before attempting the assessment? And do the markers need the rubric? Well, the answer to all of those questions is, of course, yes. You see from a student perspective the advantage of having rubrics available to you. You know what the assessment is about. You know what specific criteria are going to be assessed and the level of quality that you need to have for each of those to get to do well. The markers need the rubric essentially so that they can mark consistently. Okay, so we'll have a look at some examples in another video.